Sotadeology. In today's live session, which is Sotadeology Lecture 32, we're going to treat reality of life as revealed by formula of everything. This is going to be quite insightful and it's going to be quite informative. We're going to dissect deeply into what life is, and we're actually going to use another dimension to do justice to that. If you are so conversant with my previous videos, I had talked about life, using DNA formation and all that. I even talked about life, using some other methods. So right now, I want to talk about what life is scientifically, and at the same time, speak in a layman language such that we can all, understand what life is. So I'm going to use what we are so conversant with, like things that we can relate with, day-to-day struggle of life, to illustrate what life is. So I will be, connecting the reality of day-to-day life struggle with scientific discovery as revealed by formula of everything. So it's going to be quite informative. So now this is Sotadeology Lecture 32. Like I said, it's a full version rather. Yes, it's a full version. And the title is Reality of Life as Revealed by Formula of Everything. So now with no further ado, let's dive into it. So now, when you look at what I have right here, I want us to see this text quite all right. I know you may be so surprised that there is nothing like biological structure as I used in that particular video I uploaded earlier using DNA and all that. So I'm not going to be using too much structure. Of course, I will still use time energy wave model to support the point I'm going to be raising right here in this particular video. But then I want us to go through the textual structure and then get ideal contextual meaning of what life is. So now there are two values to derive from life, and the two values are purpose and meaning, as you can see right here in front of you. So now there are other key factors that purposeful life or to have meaningful life. So now we have constancy, we have consistency, and perseverance. These are three factors that are needed for a purposeful life. And so just sit back, relax to see how I'm going to actually, connect all this together to make meaning. You understand? So it's going to be quite interesting. So now those are the three key factors for, having a purposeful life. While instancy and feedback are the sustained factors of meaningful life. So now we have two factors for meaningful life, and they are instancy and feedback. Okay, I know by now it might be difficult for you to actually relate all this to how they could actually lead to having a meaningful life or purposeful life. But as time goes on, you will get to understand. So now, I want us to go through this quote, one of my quotes. And it says the meaning of life is to serve a purpose. Purpose is the ingredient of a meaningful life. Sotadeology's quote. This is one of my quotes. You can actually get many of my quotes on online. You can get it on you can get it at www.poemhunter.com. Don't forget, I'm a poet as well, so I have many insightful poems that you can actually read for you to really get into how I normally think about life and how I'm able to solve many problems, the likes of solving the Riemann hypothesis, and then the likes of unification of quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. So there are so many problems which I have solved with the formula of everything that I derived. And so if you want to get a copy of the researched publication, you can actually get that via www.ijser.org. So it's a peer-reviewed journal. You can actually get it there, www.ijser. That is that. And at the same time, you can actually get it via the description section of my video. I have I have server one for my research publication and server two. You can actually click on any of the two servers to get my research publications. Two research publication, I have the time theory of the universe, where formula of everything, seeing the anatomy of quantum gravity through formula of everything, where I apply formula of everything and then derive time energy wave function. So you can go ahead to, so now let's continue. Then I have second quote here, which says, all that lives existed, not all that existed lives. That's another quote from me. And when you look at these two quotes, they are all about life. And then you can see they are quite insightful. I just want you to take some minutes to ponder over these quotes. I want you to actually, you know, think deeply about these two quotes. And then from that, you can actually, have the kind of energy that you need for you to really understand today's video. So now, the first one that we're going to treat right now is constancy. Constancy is a linear range limit. I mean by this, okay, for me to quickly give you something which you can actually relate with, I will, basically show this. By saying constancy is a linear path, you understand, it's a kind of linear range limit, you understand, to infinity. Before you can actually have any form of constancy, you must have it related to infinity, because it is only when the distance which is being captured relative to infinity, it is only relative to infinity that you can call such distance a constant distance. So now if you have a distance which has a finite limit, as you move further in such trajectory, of course there will be reduction to the remaining length to cover, and so the speed, the movement will actually vary. And with that, you can't really have constant momentum. So when you have a kind of, space range to infinity, then such space range can. Okay, so you understand what I'm trying to say. So now when you look at this diagram, you see that we have a diagonal trajectory, which is linear. So you can see where we have 5.7 times 10 raised to power 32. The trajectory is linear. That is the kind of trajectory we're talking about. When you have this kind of trajectory, you have a directional path. Unlike you having a spirally formed momentum, which would not give you a kind of directional path. So it is highly essential for us to have constancy in the structure of the universe to really have, the instantiation of universe in first place. And there is another key thing that is important, which I will unravel as we progress, as we move further. Okay, so now we now get back to this particular one. So now we're treating constancy. So from that diagram, you can get to see what linear range limit to infinity is all about, and that will give us a directional path. This is how purpose-driven goals are defined in form of what one which is to live is or alive for. So now when you have a directional path, then it means that you have a purpose-driven goal. You understand? Something you can work towards to achieve. Now, there is something I want you to have at the back of your mind. When you have a purpose-driven goal, then it may follow that you will, or you can actually do anything to. If care is not taken, if there is no any other measure by which you can gauge your level of agility or your level of aggressiveness, then one might end up where one should not end up. You understand? So basically, when you look at the purposeful life, is in most cases contrary to the meaningful life, because you need to have something to gauge the level of your aggressiveness to achieve your purpose. Otherwise it will tend to something else. So now just have that at the back of your mind. So we have the emergence of constancy because energy is infinite by default. Energy is infinite by default. So I'll briefly tell you the two identities of time and energy, because that will help us a lot in this particular video. Time is continuous when in relativistic scaling with energy. Then energy is infinite by default, but energy time. So by the time we'll explore the time energy wave model further, you get to understand that quite all right. So now you can see that when you have directional factor, which is constancy, and so now we move to the second one, consistency. Now, we need this consistency because the goal as a driving force is actively in motion by consistency. When you have a goal, because there is no way you can actually achieve your next target. Your next target without being in motion. So it's more or less like you have something ahead of you that you want to target. Yes, that you want to target rather. Okay, so now you need to focus and then you need to act towards that particular thing. It's either by shooting your arrow or by developing any other means to get that target. So now the goal as a driving force is actively in motion by consistency. and that consistency is with caveat. So the caveat is that the motion is half in time and half in reaction of energy to time's motion. Now, what I just said right here is what is actually known as relativity. Many people don't really understand the concept of relativity. Relativity is just that there must be another point which is inversely related to it. Without that, there is no way you can have any point in the universe or in space. And if even if you have such point which is not being inversely related to another point, there is no way you can actually define point to a later point that are being inversely related together. That is when you can call one initial point and call the other the later point. So now you can understand that there is no way we can have any point at all in space without having an inverse of it. More or less like there is no way you can have a true self identity without having a reflection of the inverse of yourself through mirror. You understand? So that is that. I just want you to really log that down. So for us to really and by having 2 points in space, definitely there will be another central point to the 2 points. And the reason the reason it is so difficult to have global now, just like Einstein said it, is for the fact that we have this central point between 2 points in space to allow for relativity. So now, when any of the 2 points moves either towards the other point or away from the other point, they will both do so. And as a result of that, it is difficult to get something at the point of its instantiation. And another big problem is that in the universe, you will get to see this, through the time energy wave model as we progress. By the time I use, formula of everything to unify quantum mechanics to classical mechanics, then we are able to at complex level, we're able to have quantum entanglement as transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension. That is what we call complex system. And that is a genuine contact. And then relative to the classical mass, we realize that we have the classical mass being suspended to the point of time energy intersection. So with that, it is not possible for us to have global now by mass instantiation or by any physical means or by any materialistic means. Okay, so now we realize that we have this solution of global now at information level, which is also the same thing as having objective conscious experience. So now, by having transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension, we have instantly transmitted information from the positron of higher dimension to the newly instantiated electron of the substrate dimension. And so the feedback of that to classical mass worth, that has given us the global now via instant transmission. That is how we could as well have objective conscious experience. And we also have subjective conscious experience that we actually be within the substrate dimension. So now by having that transition and having it to be quantum entanglement, that we have a unified identity. So we have substrate dimension being unified with the higher identity in that sense. You understand? So I need you to understand this, because with that you get to understand this concept quite all right. So now we now, okay, so now we see that we're going to have motion in time, then have motion in reaction of energy. So now motion in time attracts mass accumulation because time by default is instant. Mass convergence is emergent to restore the default setting of time via the fusing of classical gravity with quantum gravity. Well, these things that I'm discussing right here, they are so deep, you understand? So basically, we know that by default time is instant. And so if we could have time to even be in motion at all, it will be able to be in motion by having mass accumulation. So now we have time trajectory being inversely related to energy factor for time momentum. You understand? So now energy, as we know it, it is infinite by default. Energy would want to be everywhere. That's what it means. And as a result of that, energy cannot be everywhere by having mass convergence. And so at the point where energy is meant to have mass connected, we instantly will briefly be disconnected. And that brief disconnection, as we have it continuously, is what we call discrete nature of energy when in relativistic scaling with time. So now, when you understand the structure, the nature, the true nature of energy and the true nature of time, then we can get to know reality of life quite all right. So now with that, we get to see that time by being instant by default, then it will not, time would want to just be, you know, should I say, would want to be just snappy. It wouldn't want to be elongated in any form. And so the only way we could have motion at all in time is to allow for mass convergence. And when there is mass convergence, then there will be this asymmetric nature between time and energy. So there will be this asymmetric nature between time and energy. So now we can get to see that with that, there is possibility for us to have that 45-degree trajectory of linear trajectory as we have it. So now, okay, therefore the consistency of linearity, sorry, I made a mistake here, of linearity. Of linearity, that's what I wanted to put there. Consistency of linearity must be maintained as mass accumulation battles with its authority of clarity at the expense of arbitrary convergence. So what is arbitrary convergence? Arbitrary convergence is a mass formation to which a real mass is inversely related as half formation. Because there are there are instances at quantum level where we have mass accumulation, time, energy, or okay, let me say there is a region in the universe where energy is being so contracted relative to time. And in that region, we have compacted equilateral triangle, which means that we have we have the maintained structure of linearity even in that compacted equilateral. You understand? And having that simply means that By having mass convergence to be at the extreme end of linear trajectory, it will want to reduce, because by having mass convergence means that we have localized instantiation, and so there will be limit to the trajectory of that linear momentum. You understand? So by having limits to that, by having such limit, we're going to be having this kind of contraction, which must not happen because the trajectory is constant. So the constancy must be maintained, and the constancy is maintained by constantly accelerating momentum. Anyways, so now with that, you can see so far we see why we must have constancy to have clarity and to have purpose driven goal. And then we see why we must have consistency, because the driving force of such goal must actively be in motion at all the time. And we know the caveat of that, which will generate central point between the 2 points, since we can't even have motion at all without having 2 points. Okay, now these discoveries with which I'm trying to explain the reality of life, they are actually novel discoveries, and I was able to get them by applying formula of everything, and that is why we have the title as we have it. So the third factor is perseverance. Perseverance is the discipline of endurance for achieving the goals, irrespective of the challenge or challenges of mass accumulation that endangers the sustainability of linearity. Now you see that I got my linearity right here. Okay, so that's that. So now perseverance. Why do we have the perseverance? So I'm like trying to, you know, uh, consolidate these factors so that you can see how important and how fundamental they are. They might not be fundamental really as such, but then they are emergent because one condition, thing, or is actually causing us to have the development of these factors as we have them. So now, perseverance is emergent as a result of the counter effect of mass convergence at the end limit of linear trajectory to contract its length. But the constancy of linear length is only contracted to constantly accelerate momentum. So that's what I explained the other time. So now you can see why we have perseverance, because when you are moving against gravitational field, that you have this weight of repulsion that you must actually wade through for you to acquire potential energy. And then right at the topmost, you can have free fall because the potential energy must do work. You understand all those things. So now you can see how I'm actually relating science with the reality of life for you in life, for one to have a purposeful life, and then for one to really have a meaningful life. Now, number 4, instancy. Instancy is a total traveling in time through arbitrary mass convergence unhinderedly to the higher level, where meaning of life is obtainable as a unified identity of substrate dimension to higher dimension. That is quite mouthful. Rather, that is quite mouthful. Okay? But then what I'm trying to say right here is that instancy, we have instancy only when we have the totality of traveling in time alone. So it's not that we have half momentum in time and then we have half momentum in energy. So the moment we have totality of the traveling in time, then time we assume its default state, which is instant. And it is only by having instant trajectory that we can get when you have 2 points that are related or that are inversely related to each other, and you have the system such that when one point moves toward another, they both do so, then you know the problem that it is not possible for us to have any object at point of its instantiation. So now if we must actually get any point at the point of its instantiation, then we must travel instantly. You understand? Instantly to where that object is. It is only by then that we can, achieve that reality. Okay, so now you see that the only way, the only means by which we can then obtain meaning of life is for us to have this unified entity. I have it as having substrate dimension being unified with higher dimension, which if you have 2D as substrate dimension and you have another 2D which is inversely related to it at higher dimension, and you have it being instantly connected to have this unified identity, then you see that the 2D will become 3D object. And so you still have the 2D being because we have the transition to be in form of quantum entanglement, and so it will be a unified object. So now let's look at this. No true self is obtained by itself, but by the reflection of its inverse through a mirror. There is no way something can be self-evidently true without having an inverse of its self to hit. So you can't have a real image of yourself without having a reflection of your inverse self through mirror. So basically, this is still pointing to the reality of the universe, as like I said, and so we can get to see that the first factor of having meaningful life is instancy, which can give us unified identity. And now, with that, we can get to see that indeed we can't actually claim to be independent of. In this case, I would say we can't actually claim to be independent of God, because how can you describe it when substrate dimension cannot be as a whole? So when there is a need for something to be connected to another thing before it becomes a whole, then you know that indeed that thing is not independent on itself. So basically, definitely, there is no way we can describe ourselves as humans in such a way that we now describe ourselves as a whole, because we are connected to something that is bigger than us, and that is the reality of life. And that thing that is bigger than us, to me, based on my own belief, is Almighty God. And that is why I was able to discover the signature of Almighty God as a flipping mechanism through my theory. And I always tell people about that. And then there is something I'll point out to you as we move further too. Number 5, information from such higher levels, which is instantly transmitted via quantum entanglement as feedback, will not only inform us of what will not inform us of, yes, I made a mistake here too, will not inform us of what to live for, but also what to die for. So now, there is no way one can actually get meaning. Now, the meaning of meaningful conversation that we have is as a result of one insensible conversation elsewhere in higher dimension that we can't really observe. So we have meaning out of, we have this arbitrary be inversely related to our real mass. So now we say that arbitrary mass is not real because by relation to the real mass is not yet instantiated. We have that at quantum level. So no electron can actually be instantiated without it being connected to a positron at higher dimension, which is inversely related to it. It's at that point of connection that we have quantum entanglement, that we now have the instantiation of the substrate electron. We need to know. And based on that, I'm trying to tell us this reality of life. So now, we can't say so basically what I'm trying to say is that, let's say we define some goals that we want to live for. Probably we give birth to children, so we want to actually work hard to give them better education. We want to even, be at the peak of our career, so we want to study more. If those things are the things that we want to live for, so we must have meaning for that purpose by getting connected to higher dimension. That is what from the higher dimension can caution us as to how we achieve those goals, so that we don't just go extra miles in achieving those goals such that such action will now be at our detriment. You understand? So the feedback from the higher dimension, which we now serve as what we want to die for. Because what we want to die for will either be we want to die for Almighty God or we want to die for Satan. And if that is it, that, okay, we want to die for God, and we know that dying for God, you must do good. And so you will not go, you will not go through the process of achieving your goals in such a way that it will jeopardize, what you are to die for. So you don't just live your life at the detriment of what to die for. You understand? So that is what the meaning of life that I want to actually explain to us. And I believe this particular video is quite informative in that sense. So now the ultimate solution of life is the feasibility of global now via instantly transmitted information, which is quantum entanglement. So quantum entanglement is a connector of life as a unified identity. Now, when you read Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11, and then you read verse 15, you will get to see the reality, because at that verse 11, it says God has made everything to be beautiful in its own time, and he created them such that he put the secret of the existence of those things at the center of everything that he had created. And then when you go to that verse 15, it says that what has been before is now, and what is yet to be is now. And it now said that God will request the past. So for me to visually explain this to you, I will have to use this time energy wave diagram. Let me quickly use this time energy wave diagram. When you look at this diagram, when you look at the center vertical trajectory where we have the instancy of time trajectory. Now, the diagonal trajectory, which is the linear trajectory that we have from left to time, and it is the constancy of gravity relative to the constancy of light to heat. So we have that from left to where we have the instantiation of quantum arbitrary suspension. So now, what I'm now trying to explain about the past being now and the future being now is that this vertical trajectory, it has its momentum right from the classical level, right from that classical arbitrary suspension down to quantum arbitrary suspension. And because that trajectory is instant, so, and with the virtue of the energy gap, we have what is known as spontaneous symmetry breaking. And so the trajectory goes beyond the limit of quantum arbitrary suspension to higher dimension where we have it connected to positron of higher dimension. And so having we now electron in the substrate dimension. And so the instant transmission of the information is what is known as quantum entanglement. And that is the genuine contact, which we serve as to classical mass where it is, will now give us objective conscious experience, which will as well give us the global now. You understand? So when you now look at this, what this is telling us is that the solution of formula of everything is telling us that the globalized nature of quantum mechanics is actually cohorting at this vertical entanglement with the localized nature of classical mechanics. So for us to really or quickly have understanding of that, what that is transmitted instantly without having a localized point of source and localized point of destination. And then one localized source to localized destination, we may say it is not instant. But then it is instant if we could have genuine contact at both sides, at both ends simultaneously. And we have that through transmission of information. And with that, we know that we have global now. And so we know the signal that we have is as though there is no space in between the 2 points. And with that, we can say we have global now. So that is the solution or formula of everything for us. So if you want to know more about reality of the universe, make sure you watch Sotadeology lecture series on my YouTube at Sotadeology altogether. So with that, you can get to know the reality of the universe. And so this is reality of life. And I believe it is quite informative. And I hope you enjoy it as I enjoy it right here with you. So now, that is that. So I'll call it a day right here. Hope you enjoy it. I will put links to my research publication in the description section of this video. You can get my research, my published research via the link, and then you can get link to my YouTube channel if you want to watch Sotadeology links. Thank you. God bless you.